So here you are, stepping into a new age, the Aquarian age. Now that isn't really news, because those of you who have been around know that I've been talking about it for almost 10 years now. Not quite, maybe 9. But the world has been waiting since the 60s, when people began talking about the approaching of the Aquarian age. And of course, by that time, Earth was already under the influence of the energies coming from the constellation Aquarius. And so it's very interesting, because you see, with each new age, different energies happen. How could it be otherwise? And so humanity is asked to feel into these energies, learn how to use them. But it's a big project, because it's not just a concept of saying, oh, I recognize these energies are different from the energies of a prior time. It's really much more about learning to run all your systems, your physical body, your emotional body, your mental body, even to some extent your spiritual body, on new energy. And I had someone said, well, I don't understand what that means. And I said, well, if you think about the physical body, it would be similar to taking your car into the auto mechanic, and you say, well, I've heard about cars now that run on hydrogen. So I just fill my tank up with hydrogen so I can drive it. Well, of course, that won't work, because the vehicle has to be adapted to the different kind of energy. That's also true with your bodies. I've had a number of students who, whose bodies basically checked out. In other words, for one reason or another, they realized they were not going to learn to use Aquarian energies, and therefore they vacated the body, seeking to come back at another time. Now, sometimes that's related to the amount of karma that is still there from a prior age. Sometimes it's related to the condition of the body. You know, if your body is ill, sometimes it's quite difficult to switch it over to a new kind of fuel. And all the chakras, you see, have to switch over to this new fuel. It's cosmic fuel, really. And if nothing else, it should substantiate for all of you that even though you appear to be physical beings on a physical planet, learning about reality at a physical level, indeed, you're cosmic beings. Now, the cosmos, too, is physical. Oh, and to the one who's asking, the difference between the universe and the cosmos is that the recognition of the universe is just all of the celestial bodies out there. But when we use the word cosmos, we're speaking in a relational way. We're speaking of one huge system or holon, and it's organized. And some of that organization isn't always observable from planet Earth. But that's really the difference. The universe is the collection of all these celestial bodies, and the cosmos is seeing it all as a family, a single unit that is evolving together. Not that every part of the cosmos is evolving in the same fashion or on the same time schedule. Indeed, the time schedule are all off, because here on Earth you have a very limited scope of time. It has to do with the planet's relationship to the sun, doesn't it? And so while that tells you a great deal of things that you need to know about a physical journey on Earth, it may not prepare one exclusively for taking on the entire cosmos, you see, but at some point you will. And so we look at what is going on at this time. Now, you've heard me say, and I'm sorry if that I repeat it so much, but you've just got to get this, that right now the planet is in what I've called a bardo place. Now, bardo simply means an in-between time. So after one, let's say, transitions from one physical life, there is a period of time before they take another life. And in that time, many things happen. Some of it it begins with a review of the life just finished. And then some teaching happens, and maybe your spiritual teachers and helpers will point out certain things for you to pay attention to. And you'll be asked, what do you think you need to work on in your next life, and so on. Now, I'm saying this as if it were two humans sitting there and talking, and that's not exactly the way it is, but hopefully that will help you understand that there is a process where one reviews what one has just done, where one, in some cases, experiences a little bit of remorse for the things they maybe could have done that they either didn't see to do or didn't want to do. And then a plan begins to be laid in place for taking another incarnation. Now, as people mature spiritually, they have much more to say in that whole process than when they are what we'll call spiritual neophytes. They have not awakened, perhaps, to the bigger picture of what this cosmos is. Indeed, the entire cosmos is a celebration of divine joy. You see it when you look out and you see those beautiful celestial beings that are just brimming with beauty. And when we did a course on integrating or creating a new energy body, where we did meditations on each of the chakras. And one of the students in there sent in a little image that was taken by probably Hubble into deep space. But that image was so beautiful because you could see there were galaxies that were red, like the root chakra, galaxies that were orange, like the second chakra, yellow, like the third chakra, green. So this really gave people a new way to connect with the vastness of reality and to see how these beautifully colored galaxies are inputting light to your own chakra system. Now, in each age, that light or cosmic energy is focused through a particular constellation. Now, in the process of transiting all these ages, what are used are the constellations of the zodiac, which normally have been seen to be 12. There is some argument that there should be 13, but that's another lecture for another time. But these are all constellations that line up at a 9-degree level, either above or below the horizon or the ecliptic level of the sun. And so as the Earth moves around the sun appears to be lined up with different constellations. And this all happens in each age. But what happens at the turn of the age, there's a time in between where the old energies are fading away and the new new energies are coming stronger and stronger. And that time is a bardo time, because it is not clearly a part of the prior age, nor is it clearly a part of the future age. And yet you see the energies of both these ages are kind of pulling on the psyches of humans. And so one of the things that you can notice right now is that society is in a general state of decay around the world right now. And that's not so unusual when you really think about what's happening. One age is dying, another age is taking form or taking birth. And the energetic configurations that people ran their chakras on, that people use to supply their emotional energy, even their insights, their mental energy, it's all changing. And so what happens in this in-between stage is that often what you see are the polar extremes to which humanity is capable of raising. There's tremendous political divisiveness as people go to extremes to see who's on my side, and they count everybody else as other. In other words, humanity loses this sense of family, of brotherhood and sisterhood. And what happens is the egos become very strong, very powerful. They're panicking, really. And so perhaps they act out in ways that they might not act out in a more normal time. But in addition, you have social unrest. It's a lot of rebellion, because you see, this is what egos do when they're stressed. And so you are a part of a time, really, it's in between time. But it's a very formative time. Bardo journeys of any kind are very formative. For example, the sleep at night is called the bardo, sleep bardo. It is this in-between space from 2 days or 2 terms of activity, where the normal waking mind is engaged and people make decisions and fulfill their tasks and hopefully are introspective and say, did I do a good job today or could I have done a little better? Not to blame, just to be aware. So it's a very interesting time. In the bardo of sleep, one engages another kind of consciousness, dream consciousness. And I think some of you are having a little bit of the feeling that the consciousness you experience in this bardo time between 2 ages is somewhat similar to a dream time. Many of you have moments where you just can't believe this is really going on, or it just doesn't feel real, or it just feels like maybe you're in a trance, or perhaps you look at someone else and you look at them and you say, that person's in a trance. They're just going through the motions. There's nobody home, which is a little bit like the sleep bardo. And what I have noticed is that in every transition from one astrological age into another, many, many people go to sleep. They do not hang on to the knowledge and the wisdom that they have amassed throughout the age that is passing, but rather they regress. And I guess we understand why that happens. It's the stress, the chaos, and all of that. But it also says something about humanity. And this is what I think we should look at a little bit today. And I don't want to in any way just dwell on the heavier aspects. But it is a really interesting time, I think, as you look at what is happening. People in general tend to feel very insecure. But the common denominator of it all is that these kinds of thoughts and notions trigger fear. And fear is actually the antithesis of love. You know, some people will say to me, the opposite of love is hate, right? No. Often hate is there because there's love. And it may be too painful to pay attention to. And so one creates this other seeming reality, apparent reality based in hate. But it's not what's really there. You see, hatred is a very interesting thing. There's the kind that comes out of, shall we say, more political areas. And then there's the kind that comes out of personal hurt. And the second type is the type where there's really some love, or perhaps there was acknowledged love that has changed. And when you look at all of this, you say, well, what changes when that happens? And it's always the same thing. The circumstances changes. And you see, and one day people are best friends, then something happens and they can't stand each other, or so they think. But so this kind of hatred is kind of interesting. But then there's that other part that is really more part of a political divide than anything else. And I'm going to really challenge you to look at those areas today. Even those of you who don't think you're political. And I will say this, denial isn't the answer either. Even the Master Jesus said, you are part of the world, or you are in the world, but you are not of the world. And that's really true at this particular time, because that divisiveness is very strong right now. And humanity is really wanting, or so it believes, to polarize, to point out differences. And all of you have this experience in one way or another. You don't all have it the same way, but you do all experience it. And so you see, when fear runs rampant, it changes people. Have you noticed? Suddenly, when people are in fear, they lose their ability to be present, and sometimes they lose their ability to be compassionate as well. Yet here you are perched on a planetary transition into the Aquarian age. You see, this is an opportunity for manifesting a higher level of human evolution. And this is really important because, you see, humanity really needs to evolve. If you look throughout the Piscean age, what you will see is that humanity did not evolve its collective consciousness very much at all. In fact, I think we could go right back into the age of Aries before that and recognize that in terms of consciousness evolution, there hasn't been that much progress. Now, technology has evolved, you see, and people have become, many have deified technology. They no longer look for God or the Supreme or the essence of divinity out in the cosmos. I have it in my little gadgets here that help me stay on time and put the world of information at my fingertips. So we've seen in just the last 100 years, the Earth has seen tremendous evolution in terms of technology, but not so much in terms of consciousness evolution. So this is why I can tell you humanity really does need to evolve. And if you look out at the world, all of the crises that humanity now faces have come about as a result of a lack of evolution. Now just let that in a little bit. You see, while we were so busy evolving technology, we got into plastics in a very big way. And it turns out that plastics are harmful for all of you. You now have microparticles of plastic in all of your systems. It's in your organs. This is why autoimmune diseases are higher today than they've ever been before. It's in your blood. It's in all your tissues. It's in the food you eat. You can't really get away from it. But it's because nobody was paying attention to what plastics can do in a negative way. All that was sought was greater convenience. And you know, those plastic bags make life convenient. But they also kill a lot of sea mammals. And they do a lot of other things as well. And it's not about going into that so much. It's just about asking you to see that the problems, which are huge today, whether it's changing climate, whether it's out of control population, all of these have happened due to a lack of evolution. And so if you really look at humanity, or let me say this, if we consider human nature, that's the part that is still anchored in a rather primitive time. When we look at, if we just look at all the problems, we can say that humanity has some options. And the one right now is this, that it will just have to use its best intellect to solve all these problems at the same level that they were created. In other words, use the same old consciousness to try to fix the problems that this level of consciousness brought up. Now, those of you who are familiar with Albert Einstein and some of his work, he was a bit of a mystic. I don't think he would have used this word, but every morning he would enter into a contemplative time where he would try to attune to the universe. And one day he realized that it is impossible to solve a problem from the level of the problem. And so what I'm suggesting is that even though that's what humanity thinks it's doing right now, this may not work because consciousness is remaining at the level that created all the problems. So you see, something, I think, at the dawn of a new age, something greater or more is really required. We could say this is a time when Earth needs pioneers to enter a new frontier of consciousness. That may not be the best terminology, but I think you get the idea. It is, what we need is people who are willing to participate in the evolution of consciousness and culture. Now, I guess what we're trying to say is we need to evolve human nature. Now think about that for a moment. This is the part that I was trying to talk to about being a bit primitive. You see, when you think about what most people mean when they are actually referring to or using the phrase human nature. It has to do basically with ego needs. There's safety, there's security, and there's certainty. The ego really needs all of these, and it can become quite rigid in its efforts to secure or to hang on to such things. We could say that these three energies or these three points of security are what drive human behavior. And because we're in this Bardo time between two ages, it's an appropriate time to look at where that collective behavior has gotten humanity. And also in this Bardo time, you begin to see extremes, people going to real extremes. You see, the ego always wants to know what's going to happen next. Why? So it can be prepared for it. In other words, it thinks if it knows what's going to happen next, it can maintain safety or security. But certainty is huge for the ego. Tell me now. My students say that all the time. Tell me what's going on. Explain this to me. Because the ego is so uncomfortable with not knowing. But again, when you think about it, what the ego wants is pretty unrealistic. It wants to feel utterly secure in a time when the planet is quite insecure and when humanity is facing tremendous challenges. So in a way, that desire for security is well, it's primitive. That's what people have always wanted ever since they took human form, you see. And so when I talk about evolving into a different kind of human being, really I'm talking about evolving beyond the needs, the ego needs for stasis or for certainty, for security, safety, and all of that. Because it's so unrealistic in trying to demand what it's going to get, it causes some distortions. Many people go into denial, don't they? I don't have to pay attention to what's going on in the world. It's not my reality. I'll just make up my own reality, you see? Or I don't have to get involved in that Black Lives Matter thing. It doesn't affect me. Well, maybe it's already affected you if you feel that way. If you don't really desire justice and equality for all people, why should you have it yourself, you see? So these behaviors that come from a form, I would say, of selfishness, what you will see is that there have always been humans who are willing to compromise, oppress, or dominate others so they can have more. Now, it may be more money, it may be more territory, it may be more whatever, but that idea of gratifying the ego with more of something is really behind most of the maladaptive behaviors that have been normalized here on Earth. And quite frankly, if you look out into the world today, you will see all manner of maladaptive behaviors going off. What you will find is that often people come under the influence of a leader who may be charismatic in some ways, but who himself, or I suppose it could be herself, is really distorted in their understanding of what needs to happen, of what really this earth process is all about. And thus they often pander to a certain segment of humanity and use that in whatever way they can to enhance their own, sometimes wealth, often it's power. And this is primitive. This has been going on since the dawn of human activity on the planet. In fact, it was less so in the Neolithic, Paleolithic times, because at that time the world honored a mother god. And the mother god was nurturing. And then, a number of years ago now, something called the ego took up residence and became very powerful. And just to put it in a story form, it would be like when humanity lived in tribes, and let's say one was a really good hunter and he could bring back food for the tribe. And one day it occurred to him, wait a minute, why am I sharing all of this with the tribe? I can keep it all for myself. Flagrant demonstration of the kind of selfishness that the ego gets into. And, it's not that there's just bad people out there that have all come together to do bad things. It's not. What history has shown time and time again is that good and decent people can be compromised by faulty leadership, and they can do despicable things to one another. As you sustain this passing moment that we call the bardo between two ages, you will see much of it. My job is to help people liberate their minds from suffering, to liberate their lives from the karma they've built up in prior experiences. And you see, only you can do that. Now, as we've come through the Piscean age, which was an age of great international religious teachers appearing, as we've come through the age, something happened to the teachings of just about all of them. In other words, the Buddha kind of kicked it all off, didn't he? He was about 500 years before the presence of Jesus. And of course, the Piscean age has been said to have started with approximately the birth of Jesus. But the energy had been coming from hundreds of years prior to that. It was just becoming more stronger and stronger by the time Jesus came on the scene, excuse me. But the Buddha had come on the scene 500 years before. And there was something amazing about his presence here, because he taught people, you can do this yourself. You have to evolve your consciousness. You cannot expect that in a miracle, the gods that you honor are just going to enlighten you, give you a flash. Now, honestly, the more people tune in to the divine level, and the more they exercise their connections to the divine, the more likely they are to have flashes of insight that really help them understand the divine, and so on. But, tradition to tradition, the divine is described quite differently. Now, in the big picture, that doesn't really even matter. And so it's really interesting that as you enter a time where there is a lot of political divisiveness, sometimes religious divisiveness comes along as well. It's kind of pandering to the political. And in some sense, at least at the vastest level, I think this says that people have lost their sense of connection to the divine. Now, not everyone, of course. You're here, you see. But do you remember back, some of you are old enough to remember, back in the 60s, certainly in the US, somewhat in Europe as well, there was this movement, it was called God is Dead movement. And it doesn't make a lot of sense, but really it was a time when people were getting ready for the Aquarian age, because they were really saying, wait a minute, I have to be self-sufficient. I can't just say, okay, you're the God I worship, you do this for me. I have to be self-sufficient. It took kind of a strange turn, but that's humanity. Often that happens. So as you look at what needs to happen, and this is what started in the 60s, was that the whole, or let's say human consciousness as a whole, needs to evolve. It needs to be rid of the primitive ego drivers that it has called safety, security, and certainty. You see, all of those, as we noted, trigger fear if they're perceived to be absent. But what's more than that, they reveal that humans are helpless. How do I ensure for my safety? It's not a safe world. There's somebody out there to get me. Maybe the universe is coming for me. I don't know. I'm not safe. But of course, when one is seeking safety, there is a perception that they're not safe. And so that is the reality they create. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? So if human consciousness is to evolve, it must include all of humanity. What's more, It must reach down into those subconscious levels where the drivers are that drive human experience. Because these are the parts that are still primitive. They're still focused on survival. So it's not only safety and security, but there's this sense of lack, which is why people will hurt others to have more for themselves. I mean, we can explain all of this, and I suppose at a psychological level, we can say that it's, maybe it's understandable, but it certainly is not humanity at its highest level. You see, the most perhaps significant problem is this. For all its technology, for all its mighty creative ability, humans still resist participating in the evolutionary process. They want everything to stay the same. But if you look at some of the great ones who came through that civil rights movement back in the 60s, what do you see? And this, I submit, has always been the case. When you have a situation where there is oppressor and oppressed, it is the oppressed who are just expected to take the high moral ground. The oppressed are expected not to hate the oppressors, even though they get hatred from the oppressors. And this is true all around the world. Fortunately, there are always those among the oppressed who do that. If you go into hatred, hatred wins. But you see, what has always been noticed is the ones with the guns are the ones who can behave the worst and get by with it. Not forever, because karma doesn't forget these things. But the one who is oppressed is the one, if they are to endure it, they have to go to the moral high ground. And even if they receive all manner of hatred from these primitive levels of just wanting more, again, it may be money, but it may be territory. It may be resources. But this wanting more all the time, it's a type of selfishness that has brought about all the maladaptive behaviors you can see on earth today. So rather than thinking that you're going to fix them all by staying at the same level of consciousness, maybe it's time to kind of go on record for yourself, affirming to yourself that you want to be a person dedicated to becoming a different kind of human being. One who can release the kind of greedy notions or let's say, what some people call is their right to feel safe and secure and be certain about the future. It's crazy because right now you're in a Bardo experience. There's no way of knowing now how this is going to play out. The birth into the Aquarian age, as it is happening, will be smooth for some, and it will be very bumpy and difficult for others. And it purely depends upon the level of consciousness each one is engaging as they go through this time. I know that there's a bit of a tendency, I think, for people to think that, because you are all under the influence of these divisive politics all around the world. Granted, in some places it's much starker than it is in others. But there's a temptation to think that, the unevolved ones are the ones who are on the other side. In the US, they say on the other aisle. There's only two political parties, and so you're on one or the other. And there's some upsides to that, and there's some downsides to that. But once again, if we're going to evolve humanity, it must include everyone. And the only way we're going to do that is if some of you just are really willing to do the ruthless investigation that's needed to root out and dissolve these more primitive levels of human nature. That's interesting, isn't it? To think that in your evolution, What you're really working on is the things that have held humanity back because of what is called human nature. Now, maybe that's not really what human nature is capable of being, but it is how most people see it. Now, I know it's very easy to focus on the world at large and look at all the things that are going wrong out there. And you can think this is an assignment for you to do. No, we're not doing it here. But when we finish this and you take some personal time, I want you to sit down, maybe with a sheet of paper. You can do it just in mind, but if you don't take some notes, you may not remember it. But I want you to think about something that humans do to others that is very cruel and oppressive. Well, some of you will go back to maybe experiments done on living humans or living animals. Some of you may focus on places where it's a war-torn place and people are starving and the people that have the food won't pass it out. Or anything. I mean, there are just many situations where you can actually observe this cruelty going on. And it's there for you to see it. I mean, this is one of the really gifts of the Sparto time, is it brings people to extremes. You see, when people are really stressed, they often regress. And they go back to a prior, perhaps more primitive way of being in their relationships and in how they fulfill the roles in their society. So think of something that you consider to be heinous, a terrible thing that someone has done, or maybe some ones have done to others. And then, when you think about that, you really try to analyze what manner of thoughts arose that would allow that to happen. I'll bet you fear is in there. Probably selfishness too. And what kind of emotional quality fueled those acts which humans have done? Done to one another, themselves actually. And then you become very circumspect and look at yourself. And when you've kind of analyzed what the thoughts and feelings were that maybe allowed this thing to come forth at the level that you witnessed it out in the world, you want to go inside and be very ruthlessly honest with where you have experienced similar thoughts. Maybe not the thought of really hurting another person, but the thoughts of fear and selfishness that tend to be behind all of these acts. And you look very carefully at yourself. You have to ask yourself, do you still need the kind of primitive nature that brings these about? I suspect all of you will say, no, I don't need it. And yet, there will be times when you put yourself first when you maybe shouldn't have. There are other times when that may be appropriate. But what I'm talking about is all the unconscious ways where you're just caught up in your own life and your own needs and your own wants and your own whatever. I want you to see how the presence of those thoughts and those emotions have blocked your liberation. And if you're really honest, my dear friends, if you're really honest, you will discover that all of the things that drive humans to do unconscionable things to one another are in you. Maybe not to the extent, no, you don't have the power, maybe to go out and take a nation captive and make it do your bidding, but that's beside the point. You have to really do the ruthless work of this kind of investigation if you want to be done with those primitive drivers. Because for most people, they're still in control, you see? So this is just something for you to think about. Where do these atrocities come from? They come from these primitive levels of survival, where I will do whatever I have to do to get more of something. That is so primitive. And yet, If you look at the world, you will see many people are ruled by those very, very drives. But if you are one of those who is willing to discover a new type of human being, one that is open, the first thing you have to do is confront the ego. You see, the ego gets very rigid. And the ego thinks its job is to block all incoming information that might challenge its position. That's its job, or so it thinks. So you're going to have to challenge that. You're going to have to ask yourself, where did this come from? It didn't come from anywhere specifically. It came through this process that should have been evolving humans, particularly through the past 2 astrological ages. But this consciousness, this human nature, didn't evolve. Other things, maybe, a lot of technology, but it's the same human consciousness, manipulating it to get more. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm not trying to say anything is bad, or I mean, everything can be helpful. Because when you really learn how to do it, every activity you do is spiritual service. It's your spiritual practice. So, if you will, I'm going to close this part, but do that exercise. Look for the seeds of that primitive nature that humanity has clung to through, well, probably numerous ages. Look for it in yourself, not to make yourself bad, just so you can go free. If you don't know when selfishness drives you, you will never be free of it. If you don't know when fear is driving you, you will never be free of it. So you see, you have to still do the work. But the good news is, it is time. And the fact that you're in this bardo and moving into a new era on Earth means you're going to have some support from the new energies. And as they come in now, what some people are seeing is that there's no limitation on them. Not now. Maybe after humanity has manipulated them and tried to say, well, we can only use this for this. And, just think what happened to the great teachers when their teachings were put into the hands of humans. Often it wasn't such a pretty thing. It was distorted to be used to gain personal power. In other words, it was subjugated to levels of primitive selfishness, you see. So I think we've said enough so that you've got the picture there. And I want to, but just do this with me before we go to the Q&A session. Just close your eyes for a moment and focus on your breath. The world is a big, crazy, and very insecure place right now. And you are all called to face it. Not to deny it, not to run away from it, but to say, what have we done? How did we get here? But you see, you have to face it calmly. Because if you try to get into those primitive driving parts of your unresolved nature, you'll have more of the same, not anything different. Someone has to begin right now seeing what needs to be released. And granted, people are not run to the same degree by any of these driving forces. Some people are totally encapsulated in their fear. Others are not. It's not good or bad. It's just that these primitive inclinations need to be dissolved. And you can only do it if you stay in a calm place. Right now, you're all being asked to look at your attachments and your aversions. Some to a greater extent, perhaps. Something is really in their face. Others to, I don't know if it's a lesser, but it's a different level of experiencing. What are you clinging to? What is it you just cannot turn loose of as you enter the Aquarian age? For some of you, it does engage the greed level. I want this, I've got to have this, I've got to have that. But for others of you, what you can't turn loose of is your aversions. I'm never going to like this, or I'm never going to like this, or this is bad. And so, people see aversions as the inside out of attachment, and at one level they possibly are. But I have never seen a person with strong aversions who was not attached to them. So this is what must be given up, and here's how you do it. You focus on your breath, and you say something like this. Breathing in, I calm myself. Breathing out, I smile. Something so simple. Calming on the in-breath, smiling on the out-breath. Calming, smiling. It seems so simple, but the Buddha said with the breath, the in-breath shows, it reveals the stress of arising. Those were his words. And the out-breath reveals the stress of passing away. And it is very interesting because you see some people can see things arising in their life that are stressful, and they kind of fight against them. They feel that stress of something that's arising, maybe don't know maybe they feel insecure. Where is this going to lead? And then with the out-breath, you have that, the smile is the turning loose, isn't it? But for some people, turning loose is very hard. So there can be quite a bit of stress with the passing away as well. But just stay with that all day long. Breathing in, I calm myself. Breathing out, I smile. And what you will find is that in doing that, you'll learn to respect your own life. That's what it's all about. Respecting your life. Oh, hopefully you'll respect the lives of others as well. But you put your attention on the breath, and you are respecting your life. When you put your attention on those who are asking a question or talking to you, you really listen. You give them your attention. That's respecting them and their life. And right now, my dear friends, that is maybe the most important gift you can offer to one another. The world is full of disrespect. And you came to discover a different reality. So perhaps it's just time to get on with it. What do you think? So we've worked with the mind a little bit today, haven't we? That's it. The workshop of the mind is going on all the time. It's the one thing that continues lifetime through lifetime, because you're always working on the mind. And so knowing that you're working on the mind is probably an important skill, rather than just sort of feeling like you fall prey to all these other primitive forces out there in the world. Challenge your mind. Do I really need this fear right now? Do I really need to be selfish about this or that? Is it really more important that I gain more than how I'm treating other people? All of these are the questions you want to be asking now, because they're the questions nobody's asking. And yet it is what will help humans transform this primitive reality that they share, you see? And I'm not being negative about it. I'm just saying you've outgrown it. This type of human nature is not suitable for the Piscean age, let alone for entering the Aquarian age. It wasn't even suitable for the Aryan age that came before the Piscean age, and yet there it is. And you are the ones who said, I'll go and take physical form, and I will transform that primitive nature that humanity has clung to. It doesn't have to, but it does, because it's so based in security and feeling not safe. And in some ways, when we got to that part where it was the God is dead phase in the West, people felt less secure. It's time to create the level of consciousness you came to embody.